Hello and welcome back to Whiskey Uncorked, where today we're going to be continuing our exploration of 18-year-old single malt Scotch whiskies by taking a closer look at the brand new Bruichladdich 18-year-old. Now, I've been looking forward to doing this review because I have been waiting for Bruichladdich to release some older age-stated whiskey as an official bottling for quite a while now. From pretty early on in my whiskey journey, I fell in love with even the idea of Bruichladdich pretty quickly. Through Whiskey Tube and whatnot, I had discovered Black Art and the Octomore, the most peated whiskey in the world, and the whole idea of Bruichladdich just fascinated me. And that was only compounded when I saw a couple documentaries about Bruichladdich, and I recommend you check these things out. But I'm talking about Scotch, The Golden Dream, and The Water of Life, a whiskey film. Both of these films feature Bruichladdich heavily, and they feature Mark Rainier and Jim McEwen, two of the men responsible for the resurrection of the Bruichladdich distillery. See, the Bruichladdich distillery was mothballed back in 1995, and until 2001, they were only open for a couple of months for production in 1998. In the year 2000, Murray McDavid, who still do independent bottlings, led by Mark Rainier, a wine broker from London, purchased Bruichladdich for £6.5 million. Mark then convinced the now famous Jim McEwen to come over from the Bowmore distillery to restart the distillery and try to recreate the exact spirit that Bruichladdich was known for prior to being mothballed. And again, for those details and really up through Jim McEwen's tenure at Bruichladdich and his handover to Adam Hannett now as the lead whiskey maker, check out those documentaries as they'll be able to fill in all the other details for you. And they do a great job of just romanticizing Scotch whiskey, Islay, and not just Bruichladdich. But regardless, I fell in love with Bruichladdich right away, and pretty much immediately started seeking out an Octomore, and even was able to get a bottle of Black Art before the prices got completely out of control. But ever since then, I've had a real soft spot in my heart for Bruichladdich, even up until fairly recently when I finished a bottle of one of my favorite whiskeys ever, 20-year-old Cadenhead's Bruichladdich. So I've gotten to try a few other older Bruichladdich whiskeys. However, they were always pre-revival. Bruichladdich started making whiskey again in 2001. So come 2016, 2017, 2018, even before I got into whiskey, I think people were kind of wondering where the older age-stated Bruichladdich was. So up until the release of this bottle, Bruichladdich itself, the brand of Bruichladdich, in addition to their Port Charlotte and Octomore brands, didn't have a whole lot of clearly age-stated single malt whiskeys. Now, their classic Laddie bottling, which I have a new one right here, you can find out pretty much what all bottles of Bruichladdich, what their age statement is, but you have to go to their website. You have to find a fairly well-concealed box and type in a tiny little number code that's printed on the bottle way down at the bottom, and it's pretty hard to see. But if you go and you do that, you can see basically every cask that went into that batch, and they will tell you the age of the youngest casks in that vatting. Now, the reason they don't tell you what the age of the other barrels are in the vatting is because the Scotch Whisky Association, the SWA, basically prohibits that. Which I'm not going to go on too much of a rant, but I will say I have never seen an organization prevent a company from telling their customers more about their product. It's almost always the other way around, where they're forcing them to divulge more information. So the fact that the SWA is actually prohibiting distilleries that are a part of that association from informing their customers is baffling to me. However, that rant is for another video. And back to what I was saying about the age statement. So the Classic Laddie Bruichladdich is their introductory version of their whiskey. unpeated, as is obviously the 18-year-old. All Bruichladdich are completely unpeated. But you can tell the age statement if you're willing to do a little bit of sleuthing and if you're in the know, because again, they don't really advertise the fact that you can go and find out all this information about your bottle. Typically, the classic laddie ranges from 6 to 8 years. The bottle I just showed you is in fact 8 years old. And they do put an 8-year-old age statement on their travel retail version that you can buy in duty-free shops at the airports. There at one time was a 10-year-old classic laddie. Their peated line Port Charlotte, their entry-level bottle is a 10-year-old. And they do special releases of Port Charlotte, and those usually also have the age printed on the bottle. They tend to be around 9 years old. Even their Octomore bottlings have ages on them, but those range from 5 to 10 years old. And really, that's it. They do vintages on some of their kind of special barley varieties of Scotch whiskey, the Isla barley, the organic, and the Bear barley. But again, those are coming in at around 10 years old as well. So there really hasn't been much, if any, Bruichladdich or Port Charlotte bottles older than 10 years old released to the public. There are some occasional bottlings, like a 16-year-old Fagile bottling of Port Charlotte, and there may have been another one here or there, but really that's been it. And being that they had been open for over 20 years making whiskey again, it was starting to become a pretty big question as to where all the older whiskey was. This could have just come down to them having to use most of their stocks to fulfill the demand for their whiskey early on, post-revival, as they began to pick up some steam in terms of recognition in the Scotch community. But even the fact that they couldn't put a consistent age statement on their classic laddie was curious to some. Now, I personally didn't care too much about the classic laddie, being that, generally speaking, it was pretty affordable. It's really available, and you can tell what age your bottle is, although I would have liked to see a 10 or 12-year-old version hit the markets. So when they finally announced that they were releasing an 18-year-old Scotch whiskey to their core range, something that is going to be available on a regular basis, I was ecstatic, as were many other people until they heard about the price. So in the UK, RRP on this, I believe, is £150. In the United States, I've seen it as cheap as $175, but it tends to be closer to the $190 range, and that does not include local sales tax. So for all intents and purposes, in the US, this is a $200 bottle, which is probably a little bit more when you do the math compared to in the UK. But given that you can kind of expect at least a small premium, it's not out of line. Now, as I've mentioned in my Annoc 18 video, this $200 price point is kind of seems to be this line in the sand that is separating whiskeys that are at least somewhat affordable, somewhat obtainable, and then beyond that, it's just kind of getting out of hand. So at $200, this is expensive, obviously. For an 18-year-old whiskey, this is a dramatic increase in the pricing of 15-year Scotch or older, as we've seen happening over the last couple of years, and it only seems to be accelerating. However, I had completely fallen in love with Bruichladdich, and given some of the unbelievable 20-plus-year-old whiskeys that I have had from prior to their revival, I couldn't wait until we were starting to get some older age-stated products from them post-revival to see if they could match up. So, being that we do typically pay a little bit more here in the States for these types of whiskeys, it was obviously a stretch. If it was too much more, I really would have had to have taken some time to consider whether this is something I could swing. Now, they also released a Port Charlotte 18-year-old. However, that was at a slightly higher ABV. I don't think I mentioned, this is at 50%, which is higher than most bottlings as well. That may come in at that 46 to 47%. So this came in probably right at the line of what I was at least willing to pay to try this. And there was pretty much no way I wasn't going to get one, just because this is something I had really honestly been looking forward to for a long time. So the question is, does it live up to my hopes and dreams? Does this resemble that same whiskey? And is this anywhere near worth the $200 price point. But before we get into the tasting notes, let's talk about the bottle for just a minute and what's actually inside of it. All right, so when this first was announced and they released photos of it, it comes in this basically paper kind of jacket that opens up and kind of hugs it. In the photos, I thought this looked super cool. It looks almost leather in the photos. And then when you get it, it's actually basically like a cardstock. And it's made out of recycled paper as part of Bruichladdich environmental efforts. Now, when you get it, it's a little, I wouldn't say it's flimsy. It's a little hard to get on and off. Once you take it off, it's really hard to get this latch to kind of latch back on. Although I've been trying to keep it on because I do think it kind of looks cool sitting on the shelf. But the bottle itself looks really nice. It's got this glass stopper that easily comes off. You just kind of tilt it to the side and it comes off pretty easily. If you try to pull it right off, it can cause some challenges for you. But generally speaking, I think people have liked the bottle. Now, there's a few maybe marketing questions about it. You can't read Bruichladdich. It's wrapped literally all the way around the bottle. There's a lot of text on the label, which is great. There's some marketing mumbo jumbo here, but they do give you some useful information about their belief in making whiskey and using local water and that sort of thing. One thing I noticed is even the 18-year-old age statement is spelled out in words and is pretty hard to see. So this is definitely going in the opposite direction of, say, Ben Romick, which did a rebranding recently to try to make their bottle more recognizable and readable in a bar setting or just even on the shelf amongst other bottles, where they had the kind of unusual font. It was a little bit harder to read. And so they changed it. It's a white label with red letters and an age statement right in the middle. So Bruichladdich is going a little bit different direction in that sense, which I think for me is fine because I know what it is. I recognize it. But it is a little bit of a curious marketing decision. So what about the whiskey inside? Well, if you go to their website, they actually give you quite a bit of information. And yes, this does actually have a code on it as well. However, it isn't as useful as the classic Laddie version. In fact, just going to their site and reading their blurbs about the bottle in general is almost more useful. But I'll go over that and maybe even have some screens of what I'm talking about on here. But I do have it up in front of me just to make sure that I don't miss anything. But in typical Bruichladdich fashion, they give you a lot of information about what actually went into the bottle. One of the data points being about barley varietals. Now, it says right here that the Bruichladdich 18 is made using a combination of Scottish mainland, Islay, and organic barley. Now, they state that they can trace every single one of these varietals and every single batch or barrel back to a single farm. They state that this was entirely distilled in 2004, so every single drop of whiskey that went into this bottle is approximately 18, maybe 19 years old. They then talk about some casks, their maturation profile, which says the single malt has matured exclusively on Islay, primarily in ex-bourbon casks. These bourbon casks, together with a small number of sauternes and port casks, are vatted and married for 9 months to balance Bruichladdich signature floral and fruity character. Now, once you type in your code from your bottle, which is almost even harder to see than it is on the classic Laddie because this is a clear bottle, you really kind of have to hold it up to the light to see it. But you'll get that 5-digit code, you type it in, and things start to get a little bit more confusing. Now, the point of this is to tell you specifically about the batch of whiskey that your bottle came from. And for this one, it says that there were a total of 77 casks. Now, I compared this to another bottle, which was a UK bottle. This is a 750 milliliter bottle for the United States. But comparing this to a UK bottle, there were some slight differences, primarily that the UK version was a smaller batch using fewer casks. But anyways, this particular bottle was from a batch that used 2 cask types, so to speak. Now, they didn't specifically say this in the blurb up above where they talked about the cask types. So what it appears that they meant is they took those second fill bourbon barrel casks, the sauternes casks, the port casks, and the rebarrel casks, and when they've added those together, they then put them into another second fill bourbon cask and let them marry together. Now, there's actually 2 types of these vattings. One of them had port in it and the other one did not. And this particular batch is made up of 34 casks of the version that had port in it and 33 that did not. Additionally, once you type in your code, it doesn't say anything about the barley types other than Scottish mainland. So up above, they said it was a combination of kind of regular Scottish mainland barley, Islay barley, and organic barley. But here it only mentions the Scottish mainland barley. So I presume some of those other casks that went into the second fill marrying casks were probably different varietals, and they just don't have the interface to actually explain that on their website. So somewhat unfortunate, but again, this is all nerdy stuff. Really only for the geeks. Most people are only going to care how it tastes, so why don't we dive into that? Here's the review. So in terms of common Bruichladdich notes, there's a few that you will sometimes hear, and that is a mineralic note or even a kind of lactic note. Now, I can't say when I first opened this, I was getting a little bit more of that kind of lactic quality, like sort of slightly off milk, like maybe it's a day too old sort of thing. It's kind of subtle, slightly tart, slightly sour. I'm not picking it up like that as much anymore. When that note is really hitting, I get it more as like almost like an oyster note, like it's when it just kind of really thickens and it's aged, and it just has this briny, seafoody quality to it that is just fantastic when it's done right. But let's see what we're getting on the nose today. Yeah, not getting a ton of that lactic or mineral notes. What is really happening here is like bready and almost a slightly fermented note, like if you walk into a brewery while they're making beer. Additionally, I'm getting some honeycomb. In terms of fruit, it is actually fairly fruity, although maybe not as much as you would think looking at the barrels that went into this. But mostly I'm getting lemon and some apple. Say there's some like berries and cream in there as well, some fresh berries and cream. It's pretty slight, and I guess that's where you would find that kind of lactic note that you can sometimes find in Bruichladdich. So I did add water to this once or twice, and I can, on the nose, it almost brings out a little bit of a farmy note, like dried hay. It's not like a Brora where you can almost get like the full farm experience with even like some like manure type notes. It's not quite like that, but I would say it was a fairly subtle thing. Other than that, this took water pretty well at 50%, and it's not extraordinarily complex, although I do feel it's layered. Like you can kind of sit in it for a while, you can keep finding new things, but for the most part, unless you are really, really focusing in on it, it's complex enough, but probably not mind-blowing. All right, let's stop delaying and get into the palate. Cheers. So the complexity really comes out on the palate, and this bottle's still open only for a week or two. You can see I've even with this dram, I'm probably not even a third of the way through the bottle, so I expect this to change quite a bit, which has been my experience with older Bruichladdich in the past. But I can tell you when I first opened this, the first drink I had out of this was one of the thickest, most viscous whiskeys I've had. Now, that might have been slightly anticipation as to how much I was looking forward to this, but even today, it is still a very nicely viscous and oily experience. So, where to begin? You get those lemons and apples, although the apples really come out as green apple. I would say green apple is one of the bigger flavors that is making itself known here. Sensation-wise, you're getting salt and some white pepper. Those bready notes are absolutely there. You know, I mentioned kind of a toasted bread on the nose. This is more of a toasted oak. All right, let's go on for sip number 2. So yeah, that breadiness is there. There's honey and lemon starburst. kind of almost as the aftertaste. Like if you keep kind of sucking on the roof of your mouth, I'm getting like lemon starburst, very salty. And on the finish, it stays pretty consistent, but the oak kind of hangs around as everything else fades. You're getting a little bit more of that oakiness. All right, this is delicious. I'm going in one more time. Cheers. And yeah, it is that lemon and green apple, that tartness is like amazing with the saltiness. This is one of the saltier whiskeys I think I've had recently. And I've been doing some like Isla reviews and things. So, well, obviously this is Isla. I mean like smoky Isla. Is this the best Bruichladdich I've ever had? No, but I am certainly not disappointed. So again, I probably won't be adding water to this very often, but when I did the other night, it really kind of brought out more of the oaky qualities, some oak spice, maybe a little bit of barrel char, but I'm loving this kind of neat. So it'll probably be a little while before I play around with water much more. But as I mentioned, I have had older Bruichladdich pre-revival change quite a bit as I've gone through the bottle. So that will provide some more opportunities later on, probably to play around with how water affects this dram overall. All right, scoring. I love this. Now I'm probably a little biased. I wanted to love this. As I mentioned, is this the best Bruichladdich I've ever had? Maybe not. But I don't know if I really could have expected much more from the first iteration of the 18-year-old. Obviously, I would have loved for it to just absolutely knock me on my backside. But the proof makes itself known, the 50% ABV. You can tell it's a little bit of a higher proof. The flavors are big. There's a nice journey there. And although it doesn't quite get to that real briny quality that I love in some of the other Bruichladdichs that I've had, the saltiness is absolutely there. So scoring-wise, it's tough. Bias me probably wants to give this more like a 9 out of 10. I gave my favorite Bruichladdich. I have actually reviewed that. It is on my blog. I've mentioned it a couple times on this channel already, whiskeyagainsthumanity.com. If you want to go check that out, go ahead. It's on there. Maybe I'll even try to remember to link it below. But I gave that a 9 out of 10, and I've regretted that. I've even considered going back and changing it to a 10 out of 10 because I did love it so much. At the time when I reviewed it, I just don't think I was mentally prepared to hand out a 10 out of 10 already. Although the entire reason I use the rating scale that I do is so that I can give 10 out of 10s without worrying about it too much, as my scores are categories, not necessarily rankings. I know that if I wait a little while and I let this open up, it's going to be better. My experience just tells me that that's going to be true. I can kind of tell that there's maybe a little bit of tightness. Like you can tell that some of the flavor journey, right? Can be a little abrupt, or maybe a little spiky here and there. So like part of me wants to say 8 out of 10, which is still excellent. 9 would be wow. For right now, I'm going to give this thing an 8 out of 10 because I'm not going to score something on what it could be, but I may end up doing another review of this later on in the bottle, or at least the last drops review to kind of update that score. But I would have loved to have given this a 9, but I still think it has some room to grow. So 8 out of 10 is probably the best 8 out of 10 I've reviewed. If I use the 100-point scale, we're going to be 88, 89 up there. But I think for right now, I need to try to be honest and say that although this is a fantastic whiskey and I do not regret it at all, and I'm not disappointed in finally getting the 18-year-old age statement that I've been hoping for a few years now, I'm not quite ready to give it a 9 out of 10. However, I can certainly say that I recommend this. Okay, now value. There have been a lot of people disappointed by the pricing that this came out at. In the UK, as I mentioned, this is 150 pounds. That probably translates after tax to $190-ish, which is about the shelf price that this came out as. After tax, we're probably paying a little bit more depending on where you are. When I bought this, I messed up slightly because I bought it from K&L, which is normally really fairly priced, and they are on this. Like I said, most places are priced at that $189.99 price point. But I did find out shortly after I ordered it that Total Wine had bottles in stock for $175. So if you find this for $175, you're getting a pretty good deal compared to even our UK brothers out there. But yeah, there's still people that are upset that these 18-year-old whiskeys are starting to cost this much. If you watched my Annock 18 review last week that kicked off this 18-year-old single malt Scotch series, I already kind of talked a bit about my opinion on these pricings and kind of where some of these bottles are falling these days. And that $200 price point seems to kind of be a little bit of a line in the sand, at least in terms of which distilleries are willing to cross it. And Bruichladdich never been a cheap distillery to buy in the first place. So if you told me that this was going to come out at under $200 on the shelf, I actually, and obviously that's what I was told, I was actually happy with it. Not that I'm excited to pay that much, but given some of the other prices on some other bottles, particularly the other non-peated Islay Bunnahabhain 18, the distributors have taken liberties with, it seems, or the importers, and have ballooned that price up to $400, which I've mentioned. I would not have been shocked to see this up around $250. So the fact that I could have picked up a bottle of this for $175 plus tax, or maybe $185, $190 for me locally here, I don't think at this point, from a distillery like Bruichladdich, I could have expected much less of a price. Would I have loved this to been in the Annock territory of kind of that $140, $150 bottle? Yes, obviously. More affordable is always better. But in today's day and age, for as much as it kind of hurts to say this, this is where things are. And unless there is a major crash in the market, there are enough people out there that are going to buy this stuff up. Even the Kilchoman 16-year-old, which was another $100 more than this, sold out immediately, even here in the US. So is this a great value? No, it's not. There are really good whiskeys that are $50 less than this, $100 less than this, right? The Glenmurray 18-year-old is $90 here. That's $100 less than this bottle. Is it as good? That's going to totally come down to preference. Is the quality $100 over 2 times as much better for this? Probably not. Comes down to preference. But at the end of the day, I wasn't going to not buy a bottle of this just because I've been looking forward to something like this for so long. I was going to at least give it a chance. So would I pick up another bottle of this as soon as it's gone? Maybe not. It kind of depends exactly how the rest of my experience plays out with this. But it's difficult for me to say that, yeah, as soon as this is gone, I'm going to run out and replace it. That's almost probably not true. But again, I'm also not disappointed. So I'm kind of beating around the bush here because I understand what this is. Like, this is a premium product. It's bordering on jumping the shark into that real like luxury branded range. And some people probably already consider that 150 pounds, $200 to be luxury. But it's certainly not Macallan levels. It's not Dalmore levels. And there's even Glendronach is $220 pre-tax here. So this has still got up to $30 lead on that. It's 2024. It's the world we live in. And we're put in the position to make these choices, which is why I'm doing this series to begin with. So if you love Bruichladdich, you're not going to be disappointed with this. It has Bruichladdich character to it. They didn't go too heavy on the cask influence. You know you're drinking a Bruichladdich. You know you're getting that maritime, slightly briny, maybe slightly mineralic, slightly lactic sort of experience, slightly fermented kind of notes all the way through. But it all just kind of works together really, really nicely. And you can tell a lot of care went into this. This is a quality spirit with quality casks. You're getting that extra few percent of ABV. So if you love Bruichladdich and $200 is in your price range, I can recommend it to you. If you really need to stretch your budget to pick one up, maybe not. I wouldn't recommend this be your first Bruichladdich. Get a bottle of the classic laddie for like $50 or whatever these things go for these days. If you love the classic laddie, you're going to love this for sure. Is it an absolutely must-have? Only if you know that you love Bruichladdich as much as I do. That is going to be a pretty difficult one to pass up. So this is the epitome of kind of my whole thing with my channel. I don't like talking about price. It's unavoidable, particularly with like these new releases that are pushing that bar up a little bit higher each and every time. I want to focus on just the whiskey in the glass and appreciate it for what it is. And this is kind of the epitome of that. If you can buy one of these, if you can afford one, I'm not going to blame you. There's some people that will say, well, you're part of the problem. And maybe that's true. But this was one bottle that I wasn't going to boycott just because I knew how much I liked it. And I know that it could have been worse. So it almost felt like it was a fair price. It all comes down to a matter of perspective. I don't regret getting it. Hopefully the price stays static for a while. So like things just kind of catch up. And maybe at some point that $200 price point feels more affordable, with pay maybe increasing at some point, although we all know how that goes. So yeah, that's about all I can say about it. This is definitely a buy if you know what you're buying. But I'm going to wrap it up here. Again, this is a big series. There's a lot of different topics to talk about. And I'm happy to get this Bruichladdich 18 review out to you. So until next time, cheers.